I want to welcome you to today's workshop, January 2nd, 2022. Currently, it is 2:30 p.m. And first item on the agenda is to receive any public comments. No one has signed up prior to this meeting to address council workshops. We'll move on to a discussion that may be needed in the regular meeting agenda items for tonight's meeting. Council or staff, anything we need to talk about?
Yeah, Susan and I were talking about item.
What number?
I don't know, I'm looking.
Is it H? The one that we had
H.
questions about last time?
Yeah.
Any change?
Thought maybe that might need to be discussed.
Okay, so we'll pull that one. Anything else? Go by the house the other day. See what staff, anything? Okay. Very good. So tonight we'll pull for further consideration and a presentation. Do we want the presentation again probably tonight? All right. We will.
This is the one that the applicant requested. Brian.
A different zoning.
Like commercial.
So we did reflect the language on what you voted for on the first, the first reading.
This is the one that
I'm here if y'all need anything.
Okay.
You guys want a presentation?
I didn't know God was in.
All right, we can, we'll do the presentation either now or, you know what, let's put on a presentation at the regular called meeting, unless maybe we have more time. Is that appropriate? Or since it's gonna be pulled, we need to just wait for a presentation at the regular meeting. Is that correct?
Wait to do what?
To have Brian give us a presentation,
He can do it.
or at
now.
least further discussion.
You can do it now.
Do we have time for it now?
Well, if we have time.
That's what I'm getting at. Let's,
Guess it depends how long the conversation would be.
right. Mr. Chandler, let's plan on a brief presentation. I'm looking at him up there. Let's plan on a brief presentation at council tonight, and then any further questions will follow after that.
Sounds good. I'll be prepared. Thank you.
Yeah, that's on the consent item H. All right, very good. Well, let's move on. If there's nothing else to be considered on the or any consent or any agenda items, we'll move on to the discussion of the downtown city facility strategic plan. Ms. Myers and Maxwell.
Mayor? So I wanted to have an opportunity today to talk with you a little bit more about our progress that we've made on our downtown facility strategic plan and what might be the next steps we want to take in evaluation of space needs for city offices and departments, primarily those that are within the current either municipal building, city hall that we're in today, as well as some of the other facilities, administrative facilities that are in downtown. So as a reminder, this action item really comes from our strategic plan. As part of the focus area of smart growth, we have a goal of infrastructure, facilities, and systems that support exceptional services and community growth. And we have a strategic plan commitment regarding planning for, designing, constructing, and maintaining high-quality facilities that meet the needs of the community, both now and in the future. And then specifically, the initiative related to this item is construct an expansion to the municipal building or the addition of a city hall annex. So we're going to talk a little bit today about the who, what, where, when, and why. So why, as you all know, the current city hall building is a historic asset in downtown. It was originally constructed in 1928, and it was constructed to house a theater. So very unique downtown building. It's long since not been serving in that capacity, but that was the original construction. If you take all of the square footage together, it's about a 30,000 square foot building. Of course, as it's been a repurposed facility, the actual usable space, we've got vaults and orchestra pits and all sorts of things to work around. So it's something that is not all of that square footage is usable just because of the historic layout. You very well know that the city council chambers is located on the second floor of the facility. Ideally, I think if you were to construct a new facility today, you would have that very public facing meeting room on the first floor to reduce access challenges. And as it is an older facility, we can have opportunities related to enhanced technology and security. You also all know that the city is growing and our staffing and service levels are also increasing to align with the city's growth. Just as a snapshot, in the last 5 years, we've had 4 new departments added within the organization that are currently housed within either this building or one of the other ancillary locations in downtown, such as the historic post office or the new building that we purchased several years ago from TCDQ, from TEDC, that HR is currently in.
Is the HR space totally filled?
It is.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. Mhm. So in December of last year, we initiated a process through a consulting arrangement with KPA and Covey, really to research and identify potential site locations. If we were going to look at a new or expanded municipal building, where might possible locations for that facility to be located. Many sites in the general downtown area were evaluated as part of that process. And ultimately what their report recommended was that the most feasible and ideal location for an expansion or an addition of an annex would be actually within the current campus of the existing city hall facility, kind of in a portion of the parking area. Is where the ultimate recommendation from that process brought us. So kind of the next step in the process was for us to do a little background work on if we were to construct a city hall annex or a municipal building annex, what would that look like? Which departments or activities would physically be located in that facility? So to help us with that project, we engaged a consulting firm, Facility Programming and Consulting, to help us identify and validate the departments and activities that we thought might be located not only in the potential new facility, but also how the current facilities in downtown should best be utilized. So what we looked at as part of this work was, again, the current municipal building, the current city hall, the historic post office facility, the current human resources building, the Fred Poteet building, which was originally constructed as a visitor center and is currently being used to support office space for IT department, as well as the library. The library wasn't originally within our thought process on the scope. You all know that we're undergoing a library master plan, so we're not really, the purpose of this activity wasn't really to speak to the library specifically, but it was really looking at limited in scope to the Fred Springer's archives and whether the archives are currently located partially within the historic post office and partially in lease space in the Kyle building and partially in storage, I believe. So we were looking at whether there was an opportunity for the library to house all or part of that collection. So that was the limited, that was the only part of the library that this particular plan looked at. Department heads located in each of these facilities. So the current departments that are housed in any one of these facilities were completed questionnaires as part of this process and also participated in one-on-one interviews with the consulting team. We received the preliminary recommendations from the consultants, as well as with the spaces that were guided by space sizes, office spaces, office sizes that were guided by the administrative space standards, which you may recall we developed and presented to you almost a year ago, last summer, to really help us guide in future facility planning work, including the work that we were doing at the service center and the new solid waste facility, and then and also potentially new facilities like a potential downtown municipal annex. So the initial recommendation that's coming from our work with the consultants is that the following departments would be potentially located in a new facility if we were to move forward in that direction. And that would be essentially the departments that are located on the third floor of the existing facility, finance, office of the city manager, city attorney's office, as well as some building commons. On the first floor, the recommendation is the office of the city secretary. Jana's office is recommended to be located on the first floor because she does provide a lot of citizen-facing services with records, vital statistics, and so the consultants felt like that was important to be on the first floor if possible. The consultants are also recommending that the council chambers be relocated to the new facility if one is constructed, and that space be located on the first floor, and also recommending that marketing communications be accommodated in the new facility. So one of the things that was important or a couple of things that were important in the evaluation and what led the consulting team to arrive at these recommendations for which departments might be located in the facility is what they really refer to as adjacencies. And what I mean by that are many of the questions that they asked, both on the questionnaire as well as in the interviews, were about which departments do you most often interface with. So, for my answer for that question is really, if you took a slice of my calendar for any given month, you would find me spending a lot of time with Kathy and Tracy and Jana. And so things like that help lead to their recommendations of which department should, if possible, be physically located adjacent to each other, ideally in the same facility. So they took that into consideration, as well as, again, based on the administrative space standards of what types of offices, what size of offices, how many private offices, how many shared spaces based on the types of positions, what kind of square footage would be expected to be needed to accommodate those departments. And so we're expecting, based on that work, that a new facility to accommodate those departments, as well as a relocated council chambers, would be just under 35,000 square foot facility. So really the next step for us that staff would recommend considering is now really getting it, now that we know or that we know that what would be ideal in terms of a facility size and which departments might be accommodated there, for us to consider some schematic design work that would allow us to get an idea of what kind of cost considerations would come from considering a new facility, which would really allow us to make a decision on whether that's something that makes sense for us to go forward with, and really gives us a good idea of how we can plan for that facility if that's something that we feel like is in the best interest of the community going forward. So we did a request for qualifications or for statements of qualifications a couple of months ago. We received 11 statements. We had a 7-member staff evaluation committee that reviewed and scored those statements. They interviewed the top 3 rated firms at the end of February. and the top rated firm was a firm called Randall Scott Architects out of Richardson. They have, my understanding is they have extensive city hall experience, or municipal building experience. So I think that that's something that was very appealing to the evaluation committee. Since that time, we've really been working with Belinda really and her team have been working with Randall Scott on potentially negotiating a proposed scope of work and a cost associated with that. So that recommended scope of work for initial would include stakeholder visioning workshops and probably at least 4 benchmarking tours. And we say benchmarking tours, what I mean by that is that we actually get in the car and drive probably up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area and spend a day or two looking at different city hall facilities that have been constructed or municipal facilities that have been constructed in the recent years, and looking at best practices and what's working well in those facilities, what those cities wish they had considered. And we would propose that we would really encourage city council to be very active in that process, as well as the staff that will be located within the potential new facility. It would include the schematic or preliminary designs for the architectural floor plans, as well as the landscaping and site plan, the actual fly through, so the video kind of element, so you can get a very clear picture of what that facility would look like, kind of a more 3D element of the proposed design, the preliminary cost estimate for the project, and preliminary design documents that are based on all of the work with stakeholder visits and benchmarking tours and council's input into that process. So we would, if this is something that we would like to move forward with, we would recommend as early as your next meeting, we could bring forward the consideration of award of that preliminary or that schematic design contract. We could this summer begin working on benchmarking tours, and then later in the summer into the fall, the architect could begin the schematic design and bring those back to council for consideration, which would give us an idea again of what we're talking about in terms of cost and help us plan for whether that's something that we want to do and what financing options we have to make that happen, if so. So I would be happy to answer questions. I know Belinda would also be happy to answer questions as she's really led, help lead this process as well.
I don't know if we're at this point or not, but it would be nice if we had a city council office where we could meet with the public. Is that part in there?
Yes, that would be part of what we would, that would be part of what would be included in the schematic design.
Okay.
The architect would interview you and really understand what your priorities and needs are.
Okay.
And that would help us accommodate that in the floor plan if that's what's desired, and understand what that, and again, that would be built into the preliminary cost estimates as well.
That would be good. Starbucks, you can't go in there anymore, and a lot of places where
Yes,
you
yeah.
want to meet people, want to talk with you, and it'd be just nice
Yeah.
to have.
And
we could do that.
Yes, ma'am. And I think that it would also, that's also a great part of physically going to these other somewhat recently built facilities, because you could get an idea of, what you like in real life, and give feedback to the architect that that's something that is what you're looking for or what works well. Get feedback from other cities on how that particular space is working. There's lots of things that we can consider, whether that's a dual use space, whether it's dedicated for council, where it needs to be, what size, what kind of amenities you need in there. All of that could be considered or would be considered as part of this process.
Okay.
As well as more bathrooms.
Yes, for sure.
Better located.
Yes, yeah. probably yes, probably not a bathroom in every corner, but a more conveniently consolidated bathroom.
So we don't
layout,
have a
yeah.
line, right?
Exactly.
I do have a question of a comment you made earlier, talking about the library.
Yes.
The third floor of the library basically is leased space plus some city space.
That's
right?
correct. Mhm.
How many square feet on the third floor of the library?
Ooh, I don't know off the top of
Well,
my
that wasn't a
head.
trick question.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna mark down you didn't know.
I didn't. Melinda might know, but we can definitely find out. Yeah, we're really letting the library master plan guide the library facility. It really, the reason that the library was even included in this scope at all is simply we are having a conversation around, right, where the archives needs a home. It was for a long time in the basement area of the historic post office, but there's some humidity issues there that were causing deterioration of the collection. And really the only option at the time that we had was to move it into some lease space. Ideally, long-term, that wouldn't be, it wouldn't be in 3 or 4 different locations. We also have just one staff member. He's amazing. Craig is amazing. I love asking him for historic information because he can find it quickly and find some really amazing things. But we don't have a lot of redundancy in that in that area. So while I don't have any final recommendations, one thing that we were looking at is whether perhaps Natalie and her team could help manage or serve as backup custodians and archivists in that, because that goes with their training as well, reference librarians training as well. So while I would not be able to tell you right now what my recommendation is, it's something I wanted to have some more thought put into as we evaluated downtown facilities.
Good, I just wanted clarification and you did that, thank you.
Well, I'm glad Wendell asked the question, because I had the exact same question, because it makes me really nervous that we're doing a library master plan and talking about this without lots of interface on the, whatever the last Saturday of this month is, the library consultants are going to meet and talk with whoever it is they're going to talk with about changing the access of the library to integrate it more with downtown.
Right.
And that needs to happen. Well, it feels like that should happen if this were to happen together.
Yes, yeah. And I think at this point, an evaluation of, is there a home for the archives at the library is really now from this point forward going to be driven by the library master plan and not this process any further.
Well, that, to my knowledge, wasn't something that the architects at the library are thinking about. Did you get that, Tim, when they talked to you? The archives?
No, I don't know that they ever addressed it.
We'll make sure that I will double check. I'll make sure that that's on their
because that, and as Wendell said, it just always feels like there's so much wasted space in the library building that could, as you say, archives all in one place.
Yes.
And what better than the library?
So we're saying we're building a separate annex,
That's
leaving this structure
Yes.
as is, and who would be housed here?
So thank you for that question, because I wasn't very clear about that. So we received preliminary recommendations when they made their recommendations for who would be in a new facility. And we still have, I still have more work that I really want to do before I would make that recommendation, where I would bring forward a kind of a final recommendation to you. We actually had a meeting yesterday, I believe, with our department head team. We got the feedback. We received feedback from the department heads. And I think we need to make some tweaks to what was originally recommended based on the more feedback we received. And I think we need to broaden out our thought process a little bit. For example, the Jeff Hamilton facility in Wilson Park is at some point will be vacated when the Temple Community Clinic finalizes their new facility. So what should be the future purpose of that facility? And one comment that came back from the initial recommendation was, for example, housing and community development were recommended initially to be relocated into this facility. And that might work, and that might be, what we recommend. But Nancy had a comment, for example, that a lot of the vast majority of their clients could access their facility within walking distance to where they live if they were located a little bit farther east. So would that facility maybe be a fit for them in the future? We also have what's called the Patsy Luna facility, which has had historically been the parks admin building some years ago. Right now it is it's housing our environmental services. I feel like I always don't have my back turned to you. I'm
I can
sorry.
hear you.
Our environmental services team is currently in that facility, but when the service center expansion is complete, they will move back to the service center where they really need to be, ideally with their team. So then that facility becomes vacant. And so just kind of broadening out that conversation just a little bit before we recommend who would backfill this space.
And it's not something that you would recommend we put back on the tax rolls and sell?
Not this facility, probably the HR, probably the HR. It's inside the park.
Oh,
It's
gotcha.
the Jeff Hamilton building, the Patsy Luna building, and there's also a third building there, the Blackman Center. Those are all physically located on parkland. So I think it would be difficult we could lease it as we do now, or one of them we lease now, but it would be difficult to sell. The HR building, on the other hand, it probably makes sense that when we consolidate back into, being able to kind of remove some of those satellite facilities that we really looking at as a interim solution while, these walls started to close in and we got to make some adjustments. But in the long term, we see that as probably something that could move back to be sold and put back in the public, or in the private sector rather.
One more thing, you're adding more people here and you're taking away half the parking. So where would these people park?
We would imagine there probably would need to be some probably first level, under the new facility parking, or something similar to that. It wouldn't remove all of the parking here, but we would need to address that in the preliminary design to make sure that sufficient parking exists for both of these facilities, as well as, the general public relies on the parking for downtown as well.
Right.
And part of that, we'll have parking garages that might meet some of that need, but that'll all need to be evaluated if we move forward, and that would be part of the schematic design phase.
Brenda, if you might back up to where the KPA Covey recommendation,
Yes, ma'am.
that it was high level discussion and will be planned out that to connect the old city hall or this facility with the new annex open space. And then also it could allow that connection with the library too, but that'll all be in the planning.
I think it's important that, especially if the library, the access to the library and how the library, opens up to downtown, and where if there's a new building being located, all of that considered together so that it all works well and flows and supports each other.
Make sure your library master plan addresses their parking, because they have above ground and underground parking that could be where some of this parking goes.
Thank you.
So how many floors would it be?
2 is the recommendation.
Would it be configured that if needed to in the future, have more floors?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's something that we would really need to address it. If we move forward with the architect, that's really something that would be more in their wheelhouse. I think it's I'm not the most qualified to speak on that, but I would imagine if you were looking for expansion, it's probably more cost effective if there's space to expand outward instead of upward. But that's something that we would need to have more detailed conversations with the architect and evaluate what the cost of preparing for, an additional floor or any type of expansion, and what just weigh out that with what the options are.
Just like everything else is space, where do you, if you need it,
Yes.
where do you go?
And of course, our business planning helps us a lot because we're looking into the future and we are evaluating not just what positions, are planned next year, but we've got a longer term vision for what we're expecting. And all of that is considered and accommodated in the recommendations, both for the existing facilities as well as potential new space needs. So it's not building for tomorrow and then running out of space immediately, but also balancing being fiscally responsible and not building something that you won't need until 30 or 40 years from now.
Right.
Tracy, I think you said one time this building had been remodeled so many times, we could have built a new one by now.
I think so.
So you have a pantry places with the telegram. Wouldn't that work nice? Give you plenty of space.
Kelsey, anything else for staff on this?
Go forward.
That's a lot. Everyone's been, fiscally conservative, right? And then after a while, you realize how many of these buildings the city actually occupies. And at some point, it doesn't make sense to do that anymore. So it'll be interesting to see, how the experts recommend we move forward. Thank y'all all for your preliminary work on this very much. Moving on to item.
Reserve some time this summer for a trip to Dallas.
Yay, City Hall.
Is that as far as you can go?
No. In fact, I
One in Honolulu.
Isn't there some new city hall on a beach somewhere?
There, I bet there is.
All right, item 3 is to receive a presentation regarding the draft mobility master plan. And Mr. Declan's already up and moving around on the deck. Declan on the deck.
Good afternoon. I'm here to talk about the mobility master plan. I'm joined by Richard Wilson, city engineer, as well as 2 people from Alliance Transportation Group, Jim Harvey, vice president for planning, and then Max Hoffman is also one of the planners. So thank them for being here. When I stumble, they're gonna step into the bridge and rescue me, right?
Of course. Or at least take the heat. One of the other.
There you go. We were talking earlier about standing in front of the line of fire. So we've been working on this for a year and a half now. Our ride's almost over and the horse can smell the barn, but we're not there yet. Couple key milestones. We've had a lot of public engagement, a lot of stakeholder input. Had 129 people show up for the second public meeting over at Wilson Park Center, and that's both in person and online. We've had meetings with TABA. We've had meetings with the chamber. We came and talked to y'all back in February. So we've got a lot of feedback from a lot of people that's made this a community-driven plan, which is something we said from the beginning, that's what we were going to do. Then it went back to the people with lots of initials after their names that I don't have. A lot of modeling, a lot of assessment, scenarios, looking at what do we have now, what's the future, and then how do we get where we need to be. So that's the phase we're in now, is finishing the chapters and moving into plan adoption. So chapters 1 through 10 are on that website. I encourage everyone to go take a look. And a few people have reached out and said, hey, you got a typo here, or I don't understand what this column is telling me. So we are still in draft status. If there's something that needs to be fixed, let's fix it. After the plan's adopted, we move into the implementation phase, which is actually building the projects. That's going to be a process of ranking, selecting, prioritizing, chasing money, finding, shaking the tree, and turning these things into reality. So I'm going to review a few things, and I'm going to kind of move quickly through so I don't tread over a lot of ground that we've already covered in previous discussions. These are the vision statement and the goals for the plan. You know, with each of those goals, there's objective safety first, vision zero. We want to have 0 fatalities. I've got the slide with the table tacked to my wall, 63 fatalities, and any number of serious injury accidents, bike pet accidents. But that number that I'm focused on is that number of fatalities. We want to bring that down to 0.
What time frame were the 63?
5 years.
Thanks.
And we'll periodically reassess that, look at are our crash trends, patterns, hot spots changing over time. If we put in a new road and there's a new intersection, that changes the patterns. That's going to change the crash trends. So it's something that we have to periodically just keep our fingers on. Community driven, right in the center. As we said, we wanted this to be not a bunch of eggheads behind desks. This is a community plan. And if y'all have a question, Susan already did, but by all means, jump in and let's have a conversation. I said we went through a lot of assessment, a lot of analysis. We did a comprehensive system assessment that looked at demographics, growth, congestion, level of service, the crash hotspots that I talked about. What are some of the intersections and the signal improvements that could be made? Is there opportunities for active transportation, bicycle networks, new hike and bike trails? Where is there a need for sidewalks or safe routes to school projects? Is there a different way to deliver transit service than what we've been doing? I had a coach in high school and I was talking with my mom over the weekend. She said, remember what Pete used to say, if you always do what you always did, you'll always get what you always got. So it's, I think, timely to remember what my coach used to tell me. But let's not be afraid to be a little innovative. We looked at our thoroughfare plan. And one of the good news, takeaways from this process is that we didn't need to make a lot of tweaks off of our current thoroughfare plan. That process is working. The plan that council approved in 2020 had a process for amendment. We've used that process twice already. So there's not a lot of recommendations to change off of the current plan. So we're in a good place and we've got a process that is working, that is responsive as development comes in. What works about it? We're looking at the neighborhood plans. We're seeing how the land use patterns are changing as development comes in, and maybe trying to read the tea leaves and forecast the needs for new facilities like in East Outer. Now we get into the nuts and bolts of more of the assessment and into future recommendations, change in codes, change in policies. Some of this lines up with the current UDC with restricting access to driveways on arterials. This goes as far as to add spacing requirements where those driveways are allowed. Now, what I'll say on this slide, the takeaway here, this is a recommendation from this plan. One of the next big projects that's going to come out of the planning department is the rewrite of the Unified Development Code. So these recommendations are going to be looked at as part of that process. This may be the shape of the answer. It may not be the final answer, but that's the kind of thing we're looking at. And we'll be looking to get feedback both internally from an engineering standpoint, traffic flow, as well as the development community of what's feasible, what is injurious to business. Develop some new recommendations for our typical sections for our thoroughfares. This is one of them. We've got a few slides at the end. If there are questions, we can dig in and get into the weeds on these. And when the sections were presented to the project team, a lot of us raised eyebrows and went 110 feet. Some of them were larger than that. All of the recommended sections increased. But that was due to looking at what we've recommended in different plans, whether it's neighborhood plan or the comp plan, or things like complete streets recommendations that come from outside. If you're going to include those facilities, this is the cross section, this is the right of way that you need. If you're going to compromise on something, then you can compress that. But if you start with, these are the recommended widths for medians, the recommended widths for bike lanes, and you want to include all those things, this is what it will look like. This is another thing that is going to be workshopped ad nauseum through the UDC rewrite process, because there are some recommendations in the comp plan that we've been having discussions as we've gone through plan developments and subdivision review about where's the sidewalk? Is it a 4-foot sidewalk? Is it a 6-foot sidewalk? Does it have to be on both sides? Is there flexibility to reduce the width of the sidewalk on one side, had a wider shared use path on the other side? So we've got some recommendations that we're trying to incorporate from this plan into these typical sections. So implementation, and I'm going to grab a drink of water real quick. I got one. So with the implementation, and you're going to see this chapter published on the website, Jim, within the next week.
I'm hoping to have the draft out there no later than Monday.
There you go. Not to make a transportation pun, but this is where the rubber starts to meet. The biggest thing, and it's one of the first recommendations, is a project delivery process. And you're going to hear me say the pipeline again. And it's something that, internally we've talked about. We wanted to have just a roster of projects. So when a grant comes out of the blue, take that one off the shelf, it's ready to go. We've already done some feasibility studies. We've already sent it out to maybe a consultant engineer to do some initial schematics where the utilities would need to be relocated. So some of that legwork is already done. We can be very agile and responsive when funding opportunities arise. Within that pipeline, specifically, a safety pipeline. We've been very successful through the TxDOT HSIP program, the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Would this be a good time to brag?
Let's
We
brag.
found out yesterday that, late Tuesday afternoon, we were going to receive $76,000 from TxDOT for a new crosswalk at the corner of South First Street and Central, right where the Main Street people have their wayfinding sign, and the crosswalk that's not there will be there to get people down South First Street as we have our First Friday events. Fire Base Brewery does their street parties, and people park in this lot and jaywalk across the street. That's coming. We got the money.
John.
So within that pipeline, we are going to keep, what's the word I'm looking for? We're going to keep that success going.
That's the same funding source that last year we were awarded Azalea, Sidewalks, Apache rather. I knew what, thank you. Sorry.
That's okay.
Apache. And one more, I forget.
South First Street. There's the Veterans
That's right. Thank
Sidewalk
you.
gaps.
So
So,
two
yeah, we've been-
successful years in a row. Thank you.
Thank you. Which leads,
It is.
thank you. It's due to me making a lot of other people do work. So it was not only me. If anything, I was just the one tapping people on the shoulder. I need your thing. Do my. So that leads right into financing strategies. Look at what our budget is, but having people identified to keep an eye on and be ready when these grants open up. There's, we had a couple that came in this week. Some of the new federal money that's coming out of the infrastructure bills is now starting to hit the USDOT and hit TxDOT. So we know that there's going to be programmed amounts that we're going to be able to take advantage of as long as we're ready. In public-private partnerships, we've been approached by different scooter companies and bike rentals. We've looked at our policies internally for different technology. Is there different technology that can be put into the streets for automated vehicles, self-driving cars, better sensors for the intersections? There's stuff out there that some egghead is sitting behind a computer, soldering chips together. That's going to change how we get around. So we need to keep our eyes open, be ready to implement that kind of thing when it becomes available. One of the ways to do that is to partner with those vendors. Then the cost is on them to install some of the systems. We benefit from that. Obviously, they benefit by getting their system installed, and there's a profit benefit for them. So it's a partnership. So the recommendation is to be able to anticipate and take advantage of those kind of opportunities. With that pipeline of projects, have a decision-making process of how we advance those projects. One of the things that I've seen, particularly in the NPO world, is the arguments over the criteria. Everybody has projects that they're passionate about. Apache Sidewalks, obviously, is mine, and that's going to get built. But I've seen a lot of passionate discussions over this roadway versus that roadway. And one of the things that helps those conversations be productive is have the argument be about the process. The process didn't score my project well. Okay, you're advocating for your project, no doubt. Is it an emotional discussion because I want my thing? Or is it an objective process, professional discussion because this sidewalk didn't score well because your criteria wasn't set up well? Because we all weighted the congestion over safety, or we weighted safe routes to school projects over hike and bike trails. And if we have the conversation about the weighting and the criteria and how they're scored, it tends to be a more productive conversation than I want my thing and I need it now. And trust me, I've seen it go both ways. If you've sat in on some of the MPO meetings, you would know what I'm talking about. What's going to help us have those discussions? We're going to get a package of GIS data, and I'm going to skip back a couple slides to show that point. Where was there's a number of GIS layers on that slide. There's schools, there's sidewalks, there's density of population that would make the sidewalks usable. That if you build it, they will come. To be able to lay all those layers over the safety map and say, okay, well, here's the crash hotspot. We'll have all those GIS layers available to us as we prioritize and select which projects need to get funded sooner. And then the last is the regional community partnerships, of which I think I've mentioned all of them. Maybe I didn't mention TEDC up to this point, but they are certainly a partner that you need to keep having conversations with. One of the things that I think has made the mobility plan successful is we have brought in people from all kinds of departments and forced them to think about levels of service and sidewalks and bike lanes and freight. Airport has sat in, that makes sense. Airport is transportation. Sherry Poger sat in and talked about why we're doing this project. We had Brian Daniels from RZ sat on the steering committee. If I'm not mistaken, Brian's a banker. But all those perspectives has made this a very successful plan. We need to continue that collaboration between planning, public works, parks, finance. We're all in this together, but we can't do it by ourselves. There's too many moving pieces, for one person to just be the guru. Now, that being said, Tracy's department has a big part to play because you can't build it if you can't pay for it. We've had a couple studies to look at what the budget should look like if we're going to maintain the roads in a certain condition year after year. So this came from the 2020 Pavement Condition Index report that came through Public Works. The recommendation is continue looking at that. Continue monitoring the paving condition as it decreases, because wear and tear, the roads only get worse. You have to maintain them. If we've got poor condition sidewalks, and we've heard that there are areas that either the sidewalks are not passable or they're just not there. that gives us a starting point to have that conversation with the budget. How much is in the budget for 2024, 25, 26? And we can plan for and anticipate and progress and not be reactive, to be very proactive is the idea. So we have come up with a number of targeted improvements. We've got a spreadsheet, and I'm going to have a sip of water. Based on all the modeling, based on the neighborhood plans, based on what we've heard from people, there's a number of recommendations. I've pulled up 2 of them just to give you an example. And the takeaway here is that it may come from multiple sources to recommend these projects. So the Shell Avenue realignment came out of the Bel Air plan. But as we were looking through the scenarios and the modeling, recognized that there's an intersection just up the road there, that these 2 start to go hand in hand. That realignment, that intersection reconfiguration, that may be a whole package of a project, but it makes more sense to do them all together. And everyone's favorite intersection, one of 2 that we heard a lot about, is Adams and Old Waco Road. Is there a way to improve the signal timing? Is that at turn lanes? You know, that's something that's going to be looked at. So right now we've got a few that we've identified that these are solid priority recommendations to go in the CIP. Note that a lot of these are TxDOT roadways that are on system. In the case of the US 190, Loop 363, you should just look at that and see future I-14. And TxDOT has pulled plans off shelf, and they're working on, can they expand that expressway section eastward following the current Loop 363 alignment. But what it means is, you know, the city's going to be heavily involved with Waco District to make sure our needs are met as they're working on their roads. The 2305 and the Adams and the Loop intersection. You know, Councilmember Walker, you and I talked about this. There was a gentleman that came to the public meeting and he gave me hell. Right? So, you know, I think he thought I was going to try to tap dance and talk my way out of it. I looked right in the eye and said, no, you're right. It needs to get fixed. He said, go get after me. Yes, we will. It's already a project that was on TxDOT's list to work on. I think for us, then the responsibility is to push them to get that done sooner rather than later. So part of our push is it is in the mobility plan priority recommendation to look at Adams and the Loop and how those interchanges function. Jim, have I missed anything so far? I've been doing a lot of talking.
I don't think so. A lot of the emphasis so far has been on the roadways and the intersections. We're also going through that same process with a whole series of other aspects. One of those is the active transportation system. So we're looking at what we're referring to as the all ages, all abilities network, sort of the primary system that ties the city together. That's going to be kind of the first tier. The second tier is a secondary network that connects that network to the neighborhoods and the activity centers. And then there's a third tier that's actually within the activity centers and the neighborhoods, like neighborhood connectivity trails that tie those activity centers and neighborhoods together. What we're looking at in those is we did what's called a level of stress analysis, where, you know, how frightening is it to walk or bike along this roadway? So our highest priorities are going to be those places where the level of stress and the pedestrian and bicycle crashes and the presence of schools or large activity centers come together. And then so you have some fairly early wins, because unfortunately, unlike the roadway system, we can't go and fix a short section of the active transportation system and then have people suddenly use it because the rest of the system isn't there. So what we're going to look at on top of all those things I just mentioned are the places where fixing a small gap gives you access to a lot of existing facility, so that you're getting a lot of leverage for your investment up early. And that gives you some wins that builds your enthusiasm within the community for doing more.
Thanks, Jim.
And yes, the Georgetown Railroad Trail is in there.
And that may be, because that's going to bring us to the last slide. But what we do have is spreadsheet where we're at with the project, the candidate projects right now, as well as a map. If I can get Max to maybe drive for a little bit. While he's switching over that, when we started that spreadsheet, it was well over 300 roads. Well, we found that there was a lot of projects that came up in several different ways. It may have been an intersection that needed improvement. It may have been a road segment that just needed to be repaired or was under capacity. And it may have been a recommendation out of the neighborhood plan to add a bike path or bike lanes or new sidewalks along that same road segment. So what we've tried to do is combine those to simplify the spreadsheet. And when we actually get into developing the project, there may be phases or parts, chunks that'll get pulled out based on the available funding, based on what we want to do now versus strategically needs to be done later. So I'm going to have Max scroll from line 1 down to 104. Pay attention. It's going to go quick. Stop. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to ask you is, everyone has a passion project. I know there's something your constituents are lighting up your email. Is there something that you feel strongly enough, or you know people in your area feel strongly enough, when this is published, they're going to call you up and say, why in the blue blazes is my street not on this list? So if there's a problem area or a challenge or an opportunity, throw it out there. If it's not on our list, then we will see about getting it. As Jim said, Georgetown Trail's on there. 31st Street is on there in multiple ways. There's lots of challenges and opportunities with 31st Street.
Well, Jason, 34,
The intersection at 93 and Hardwick Bluff.
and that escalated to more tension, what, Bryn, 2 weeks ago? But I think that with Bryn's help, and Hugh Shine's help, we've
And that was really
pacified the residents.
That was closer to 31st, is 93.
Oh, the Taylor's Valley
Yeah,
and the turn lane.
I would just say
Yeah.
generally 93, and I'm sure there's several projects that address 93 on the list, but I'm sure Councilmember Long would agree that 93 should be on the list.
It is. Yeah, that one
But
came
with
up.
reality, we have to understand what we can and can't do and make it clear. You know, we can't raise expectations, because when Boutwell 2 weeks ago, I'm sorry, I misspoke. When that occurred 2
Yeah.
weeks ago, my phone basically fell off the wall. But there's not much we can do.
And so a
Yeah.
more comprehensive expansion project for 93 is considered.
Yeah, that's on their
yes.
list. Our intersection, both 31st Street, Hardwick Bluff, even as far east as Old Highway 95.
Yeah.
There's one that's a 4-way stop that's been I'll say death trap.
Yes, it has.
Just say it.
There's
There was
several.
the FedEx truck that hit the bus
Yeah,
several years
exactly.
ago. You know, that there's, if it's not a roadway, it's certainly an intersection. You know, there's improvements to be made there for safety. So yeah, 93 is all over this list. Max, you want to switch to the map? Yes, please.
Sure.
Jason, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so this map, like Jason was talking about before, we have a lot of different data that we can look at and overlay on top of each other to see where those compounding issues are. If there's a sidewalk gap and that's also leading to safety issues, if the crash rate's particularly high and it's near a school, This is an online version, so it doesn't have the full functionality that the end product will have, but it's easy to take with us and show up at a meeting like this. So if anybody has any questions about safety or sidewalk apps, how these projects relate to schools, right now we're displaying in purple some of the kind of marquee projects that we've been discussing internally, and in blue, the intersections. And these purple icons here are the locations of Temple schools, and the amorphous blobs around them are the quarter-mile walk shed along the street network from those schools.
One of the metrics that came out of chapter 7 looked at the density of sidewalks in those amorphous blobs. You know, how many sidewalk feet did you have compared to how many roadway feet? It's just an easy index, and there was a few that the answer, the ratio came out to 0. That's, to me, low-hanging fruit for a safe routes project. To see if there's a way to add sidewalks in and around that school, especially the elementary and middle schools, because those do serve the neighborhoods.
Now, Temple ISD passed the bond. Has the Blackland area been addressed with the new school?
We were looking
at
at
there.
Matter of fact, we had a budget meeting last week, and that area was discussed.
To me, that should be low hanging fruit because it's wide open, basically right now.
Yeah, we're not, if you've done home renovation, I live in an old house. There's times when I want to knock the whole thing down and just build new. It's always easier to build new than to tear out and rebuild on top.
Right.
So yeah, you're absolutely correct. That should be an easy option.
Do it once and do it right.
Amen.
We have a meeting next week between city staff and TIC staff and their design consultants on the new elementary school to start looking at site plans and coordinating well, so we don't not make good choices.
Does walkability play into any of that process? I guess it does with the roadways.
Yeah, the
And
site
utilities.
plan, the
Oh,
bus,
yes.
All of it.
Student Reynolds, he and I visited yesterday, just early ideas around safety in the school, especially with everything that's going on in the nation right now. Something that if you can start early, then you can make the best decisions.
With that, are there any other questions or comments? Most y'all know how to get a hold of me or Richard. I highly encourage you to take a look at those drafts, those PDF documents on the website. I also have to take a minute to thank marketing for giving us some fantastic photographs to include in the plan. I do have a slight passion for photography on my own right, so it's nice to have great pictures. Thank you to Heather Bates and her team for getting those to us so they can be included in the drafts that people are looking at now.
Jason, you mentioned this, but just to highlight, because I know Mayor Pro Tem Morales and I have lots of conversations about this, and Councilmember Walker's on the Hill Country Transit Board, but transit was also a big part of the plan, and there's some very exciting recommendations that I look forward to working with the team on, seeing what kind of implementation options are available. So
Sure.
he touched on that, but that was another big part of the
I'd
planning
like to have
efforts.
some more detailed possible later on the route system.
I think it's probably worth its own presentation, especially once
so.
we get a little bit more detailed working, work done between ourselves and the district as well.
I'll write it down.
Okay.
So Jason, what's next? What's the schedule?
So the next is to bring this plan back on June 16th for adoption, public hearing. So hopefully, and I say this as, there's going to be a number of P&Z meetings where the public comes out. I hope the public comes out to this. And if we've done well, tell us. If we've missed something at the public hearing, by all means, put it on me and I'll put it on Richard. But
So
this is the time for
once
the
it's-
public to have their say in the plan. I can't say that, like, I don't want this to be a planted behind the desk plan. This is a community plan. This is the city's plan.
Jason, somewhere I put on some piece of paper to you about Market Loop behind the HEB Mall coming off of
Yes.
31st. That's getting more and more congested as people are trying to get out of that bad access at HEB
Right.
in and out and on the whole mishmash. And now we've
Right.
got this wonderful mural along there.
Mhm.
We need a sidewalk. We
Done.
need a mini park and a sidewalk. So people can really see the mural.
Yes.
Said done, Susan.
Done.
But I didn't hear Bryn or Tracy say
I'm
done.
listening.
I know where the money comes from.
It may already be in there, but I don't know. On South Third, the overpass.
Yep.
It's not accessible,
Mhm.
so I was wondering, is there any plans in the future to do anything like I've done on, where is that, H1 overpass? to
Yes.
have a-
Yeah, as a matter of fact, there was an example in the, I want to say it was chapter 8 or chapter 9 that I was working with Covey, that they needed an example where there was an accessible versus what does, what does the need look like? What is not accessible? And there's that at the bottom of the bridge. And right before you get down, there's about an 8-foot stretch of grass. You come off. And I said, I know exactly this spot. I went over there, took a picture, sent it back to them to include the plan to say, this is the kind of thing. So yeah, Third Street Bridge
And then when
is
you
on
come
there.
back over this other way towards town, where the bank is, there's a curve.
Right.
If you're in a wheelchair, there's no way to.
Judy, that project's already under design,
It's
in the
already-
reinvestment zone.
Mhm.
Okay. Then I'm happy.
Done.
See, she said done, so I didn't hear done to Marcus.
I just didn't say it as loudly. as-
Jason's done doesn't rank as high.
Exactly.
Very good. What else, council, staff? So now, after next week, maybe the 40-year plan begins. When you find money and finally do the projects.
Then we go into having an ongoing, and one of the things, I'll say one more thing. There was a couple of recommendations that I looked through, chapter 11 that has all the implementation steps. And I looked, I was like, well, we're doing that. We do monthly CIP meetings that discuss drainage projects, roadway projects, demolition projects, finance report. It gets all the people in the room, so we know that somebody else has a project. We're already doing that.
Good.
So that's the kind of thing, we'll just sustain that process.
Thank you.
And as a
Thank you.
reminder, there's also a placeholder in the business plan for not what we would need for full implementation, but to get started. So we will start doing dones.
Yeah.
That's good.
We
Done
like
did it.
that. We like done. We like in process and done.
Yes, ma'am.
Very good. All right. Moving on to the next item is, we'll actually move into executive session. It is currently 20 minutes until 4 p.m. And the executive session items are to receive a briefing from the city attorney regarding the Panda effluent and water purchase agreement, and pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551-071, the city council meet in executive session to discuss and receive advice regarding the matter, regarding a matter of the attorney-client privilege. No final action will be taken. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
you
Very much.
Thank you.
Item 5 is to receive and discuss a briefing regarding certain economic development prospects, and pursuant to Government Code Section 551.087, the city council meets in closed session to discuss or deliberate commercial or financial information received from a business prospect that the governmental body seeks to have locate, stay, or expand in or near the city of Temple, and with which the governmental body is conducting economic development negotiations, or to deliberate the offer of a financial or other incentive to such a business prospect. No final action will be taken. Item 6 reads to receive a briefing from the city attorney on a contract issue regarding a property donation agreement for Bend of the River pursuant to Texas Government Code Section 551-071. The city council will meet in executive session to discuss and receive advice regarding the matter of attorney-client privilege. No final action will be taken. And this is a good time for a quick break.